You won't believe what I did at the airport last week. I was so late for my flight that when I got to the counter, there was nobody there. I looked over to the next counter and asked the lady, WestJet? And she said, oh, they're in the office. I'll be right back. So a guy from WestJet came out and stared at me, and I said, I need to drop my luggage. And he said, for Vancouver? I said, yes. He said, oh, it's too late. They're already boarding. And I said, well, can I just take the flight and have the luggage sent to me? And he said, no. I said, well, is there anything I can do? And he asked if I had my boarding pass. I said, yes. And he said, just go to the gate. And I asked, what do I do with my luggage? He said, take it to the gate and I'll check it there. So I went for it. I ran up to the security entrance, and immediately the lady there looked at me and said, oh, you need to go back downstairs. And I said, no, I was just down there, and they told me because I was so late that I need to take this to the gate. And she just said, no, it's downstairs. And I said, no, they just told me that I need to get this checked at the gate. And she just looked and said, scan your boarding pass. So I went to the lineup and I put my big luggage on there, and the lady said, oh no, you can't have this here. And I said, well, the guy at the check-in counter told me that I have to bring this to the gate because I'm so late. And I said, I'm really sorry. And she said, no, what about your liquids? And I said, I'll throw them away. And she said, okay. So they took all my liquids. I shut my luggage and I ran. And I ran all the way, really quickly, all the way to the gate. When I got to the gate, there was two agents and they were both staring at me. And when I could finally talk, I said, the guy at the WestJet counter downstairs told me that I can check this here because I was so late. And I really hope that's the case because they took all my liquids. And the girl said, we don't normally do that. She asked, my colleague told you that? And I said, yes. And she said, well, let me make a call. So I'm standing there huffing and puffing, and she makes a call. Then she sends a message, and I'm just wondering, is this gonna work? Are they actually gonna let me on? And then she gets another call, and then she opens the little cupboard in front of her, and I see that she's printing a luggage tag. And I thought, oh, I was so relieved. And I looked at her and I said, thank you so much. I wish if I knew it wasn't inappropriate, I would hug you. And I said, you really saved me. And she said, it's okay. Have a nice day. I still can't believe I made that flight.